Well, good afternoon everyone. It's 5:45. The sun is just setting here. We're at Scarborough Harbour. We're going to shoot a sunset. When I left home there was a lot of clouds on the horizon. There's just so little clouds, and you'll actually see that in the other video. So I'm just starting to set up. I'm shooting with my Nikon D7500, the Takina 11-20. I'm shooting at around 15 mils. I've got my intervalometer all set up. Not that I'll actually use a long exposure at the moment, but I just don't like touching the camera at this time of the day. So you could set, if you don't have a remote shutter, you could actually just set for a 2-second timer delay, so you're actually not using it. I've pre-focused, there's some boats in the boat harbour here, so I've actually pre-focused on the boats in front here. So this is what we're photographing, and that big catamaran in front is where we're actually set up the focus point. So now we'll quickly get all the gear set up. So putting the polarizer on with my Nissi V5 filter holder system. Now I don't like screwing on the front here, so I'll bring it around the front, around the side, try to work around the clock here, make sure everything locks in properly. Okay, she's locked in. Now I'm going to use live view and adjust the polarizer before I'm going to put a 3-stop ND medium grade filter on. So I'll just adjust the polarizer first. Okay, now what I've got is a fairly even sky, which is what I wanted. So now all I need is the Nissi 3-stop medium grade. Now you could use a hard grade filter if you wanted here, but this one here, if you can see, all it'll do is it'll help blend the very bright sky to the darker foreground of the boat harbour. We'll put it in, we'll adjust it. Now that looks pretty good. So I've got the white balance set to around 5,200 kelvins, which is about daylight. We're set at f11. We have our focus set. Now I'll use the metering here. So it's telling me 1/20th of a second. That looks very good. It's a little bit cool. So I'm actually just going to add a little bit of warmth to it by using the white balance, and I'll up it to 5,500. That's a little bit better. Now it's showing me I'm slightly underexposed, so we'll come down to 1/10 of a second. Okay, now I think that's actually blown out. Yes, what that's done is actually blown out we've got blown highlights. I'll take another photo. Now that looks pretty good. The foreground is slightly underexposed, but like I've said before in other videos, this is very easily done in Lightroom. Part 2 of this video is I'll actually edit a couple of these photos. Now where we are at the moment, just beside me, which you can't see, is a huge pole, a light pole. And as soon as twilight comes along, this light will come on and it'll shine an orangey glow onto the boats. I'll take a couple of photos and I'll show you how in Lightroom you can actually get rid of this orangey glow by using a grad filter and just reducing that glow for the foreground without adjusting all the colors in the background. Now I could actually use an ND filter here to reduce the exposure, to actually smooth out the water, but it's low tide here at the moment. We don't have a lot of water. There's really no need, but if I wanted to, all I would put on here now is a 6-stop ND. I wouldn't go any more than that because there is no need for it. So now while I'm talking here, we're only losing, like, it's only a couple of minutes, but light is fading very quickly here. And this is what you've got to remember when we're shooting at sunset, that every couple of minutes you'll have to keep an eye on your exposure because the exposure will change very quickly. Has also with your light, the color of the light. So if you start out with a fairly warm white balance setting, you might want to adjust that as we move into twilight. Now I did say that I'm shooting in manual white balance, which is 5,500 kelvins. If your camera doesn't have a manual white balance setting, you'd have either, for the coolest end, you'd have incandescent or tungsten, then you'd have fluoro, then you'd have either sunny or daylight, then clouds, then shade. For now I would actually start at sunny, and if it's not warm enough for you, go to the next one, which is cloud. I'll actually take a photo. So we've got sunny, cloud, and shade. So we'll take one at sunny, we'll take one at cloud, and then we'll take one at shade. The shade one is way too warm. It looks like you've got tinted glasses on. There's a lot of orange in there. The cloudy isn't too bad. Daylight now, which was 5,200 and fairly close to an equivalent, is actually a little bit cool for me. So the cloudy one looks fairly good. So if I go back up to my manual white balance, to get an equivalent of cloudy, I'd have to shoot close to around 5,800 to get to cloudy. And that gives me a nice warmth glow. You're shooting at sunset, you don't want it to be plain Jane, you know, just blues. You want some of that warmth feel in there. And I tell people, even if there's not a lot of warmth, there's no harm in adding just a little bit of warmth, because people expect to see that in your photo. So remember that when you're editing, just add a little bit of warmth for sunrise or sunsets. If you're shooting at night, definitely there's no warmth. Twilight, it just depends at what time of the twilight. At the start of the twilight, there still might be a bit of warmth in there, but towards the end of twilight, just before dark, you'll find that you don't want too much of that warmth. And tonight, the twilight is around 25 minutes. And I mean by twilight, we call it the blue hour. So it's a time, once the sun's set over the horizon, this is when the blue hour starts. From then to darkness, we'll have around 25 minutes. Now on my phone here, and it'll be displayed in the video, this is an old Samsung S7. The camera features in here is not as good as my new Samsung S10, and it's actually starting to darken the foreground quite a lot. Of course, because I can't control the bright sky with the darker foreground, so it's metering for the whole image. And today, because there's not a lot of clouds in the sky, when I edit it, I will most likely turn this close into a panorama. I'll cut out, because there's a little bit of foreground here which doesn't look all that crash hot. With nothing in the sky, there's no need to add that in the photo. You know, why add something when there's nothing there? So it's better off cropping your image so that you get rid of the little bit of the foreground that doesn't look too good, the sky, which is nothing, and it'll make it look like a panorama, and it'll actually display much better. So you show people that photo, there's more detail in the boats and all that, and on the horizon, and they'll have more impact than showing a 6x4 photo with a bland sky. Now, if we had clouds streaking all the way through the sky, definitely I would actually add everything, but there isn't, so there's no need for it. Now we're starting to get a little bit of color in the sky here. We won't forget about that. Now, my metering's showing that I'm already underexposed, so I'm down to about 1/10 of a second now. To come down a little bit more, 1/8. Now I'm paying very good attention. On my screen I can rotate, and one of the screens here is the RGB highlight screen. So it's telling me if I've blown the highlights. So what I do, I can keep looking at my histogram as well. So I'm down to 1/8. If I come down to 1/6, it's still showing me that I haven't blown the highlights. But if I rotate to the histogram, my histogram's showing me that I'm probably about 1.5 mil from the right edge, which means if I hit that right edge, that's it, I've blown the highlights. So I'm 1/6, I can come down to 1/5, and I'm just about touching. My histogram's still showing me that I'm not blown out. Come down to 1/4, that's it, I've blown the highlights. So it doesn't take much, does it? Between 1/5 and 1/4 of a second, just 1/10 of a second between blown highlights and no blown highlight. That looks pretty good. I'll come back down to 1/6. It's at 1/6 of a second here. To show you the comparison, there's just a little bit of ripples here because there's a bit of boat traffic around. We've got jet ski rocking around. I'll quickly put on the 6-stop ND filter. Now this will actually mean that our exposure time will be reduced by 6 EVs. So here's my 6-stop filter. Normally I would actually put it behind, but I'm not going to keep it on here for long, so I'll actually just put it in front of the ND rad. Now when you put these filters on, most of these ND filters are square. If I bring it back down, can you see up here? You can actually see through the filter. What you've got to do is make sure that when you're adjusting this filter, it's just about here, so that you don't see the back end of the filter here. This is very important, because if you do, I'll concentrate here because I don't want to drop this. I've got to make sure it hooks in properly. If there's a gap, you're actually going to be letting light into the camera. You really don't want to do that. Now, of course, it's showing me very well unexposed. 6 stops, very easy. There are apps to actually find out very quickly. Digital cameras, every time I rotate the back dial on this camera to adjust the shutter speed, because I don't want to adjust the exposure, the shutter speed, every time I rotate 1 notch, 1 click, I'm rotating by a third. 3 by 6 is 18. So I actually want to rotate that dial by 18 times. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 17, 18. I'm at 10 seconds, and this is why I've got the intervalometer, because I don't want camera shake. Now this photo, because we set all this up, it's underexposed because we just waited a little bit long. But I can also see it's a little bit too warm, so I'll actually adjust. I'll bring it back down to 5,200, and we'll go from 10 seconds to 15. Now, after a while, when you do a lot of this, you have a feel for how much you actually have to adjust. I tell people, you can read as many books as you like, watch as many YouTubes like you're watching now as you like. There is nothing, though, that beats being out here, having a go. You will fail sometimes. I fail sometimes, but the more you do this, the more you understand how light changes during the day, and especially at this time of the day. We check our RGB, we're not blind. Now, because we actually lost a lot of light, the corners are quite dark. This is not a big problem. Don't worry about dark corners. The last thing you want to do is try to get rid of these dark corners, because if you expose now for the corners, you're actually going to blow out your center of the image. And this is something that a lot of people do. They go like, oh, it's dark. And they go like, oh, I've blown out the middle a bit, you know, I'll try and grab it back in post. You won't. Unless you've got a very high-end camera. Most of the time, once you've blown out the highlights, you can't get those highlights back. Digital cameras these days are so good at bringing back the shadows. So in some of these photos, in one of these, I'll actually show you how I actually use a radial filter in Adobe Lightroom to place over the center of the image. We expose the image correctly in Adobe Lightroom, then we put this radial filter in the middle, so we're not touching the center of the photo, and all we're doing then is exposing the rest of the photo. So we actually can get rid of all that dark vignetting to equal a very nice blended photo. So we're at 15 seconds. Now from 15 I can only go up to 20. So we'll try 20. And you saw the difference, like we were shooting at, let's say, 1/6 of a second. I put on the 6 stop, we went to 15 seconds. Now really 1/6, by the time we played around, it probably would have dropped to about 1/4 of a second. So 1/4 to 15 seconds, that's a big jump. Wow. Now it's hard to see, but what we've actually got is like, it's like a fan coming on top of here. And there's a lot of like a pinkish, purplish color in there. And it's actually looking fantastic. And this will actually show up in our photos. Our foreground, yes, is a bit dark. In Lightroom, it's fairly easy for me to lift up the shadows here. All I'll do is I'll bring out an ND grad, spin it around. So instead of controlling the sky, I'll actually just control the foreground here from the rock wall down and just lift up the shadows and a bit of the exposure so that we can actually see the boats much better. Now just about each exposure here, we're losing light. So like I said, I'm shooting at f11, and the reason being, I actually want a very broad depth of field. We'll wait a couple of minutes, and the sky is just turning out to be fantastic tonight. Yes, there's not too much cloud, but we've got, it's like a lot of haze, and the rays of the sun are just radiating out of the light. So we'll get to 30 we're at 30 seconds already. And this is what the problem is when we're taking long exposures, like with 6 stop, is you've got 30 seconds. Light can change very quickly in 30 seconds. So you've been mindful of that Well, very dark. So we're at f11 because we want that depth, but I don't want to go past 30 seconds. So what we'll do is we'll come down to f8, and on a wide angle lens like this, shooting at 14 mils, we won't lose that much depth of field. Now if it's still dark at f8, all I'll do is I'll quickly take off that 6-stop ND filter, because now there's no boat traffic on the water, there's no real need for it. Now you can actually see in the background, the lights have actually already just turned on. So this one here is actually already on, and you can actually start seeing I'm actually starting to turn slightly orange. It's showing me I'm still underexposed, so we'll quickly take off the 6-stop. Now to adjust it, of course, I'm way overexposed now. So I can come back up to f11, and around 2.5 seconds it's telling me. You can definitely see now, can you see what I was saying before, that this light was actually going to be affecting us, and I'm starting to get an orange tinge. Now it's telling me at 2.5 seconds I'm slightly overexposed. So we'll come down to 2 seconds, and my meter is telling me that 2 seconds it's spot on. It wasn't lying. 2 seconds is spot on, and we can actually see those ecliptic rays in the sky. Now, like I was saying before, I'll probably still crop out the top because these rays are going about 2/3 of the way up. I'm actually quite happy I did come out here, missing a bit of the clouds, but there's this beautiful golden color on the horizon. So you can see what I'm talking about. Just on the horizon there, just in the center there, that's where the sun's setting, so it's actually very bright. But you can see there's not much cloud, and you can faintly see just the rays there in the sky. You can actually see the shadow just under my neck here is actually caused by the light ahead of me. So I'm just going to wait a little bit for the light to get a little bit less, and we'll take another couple of shots. So it's 6:10 now. We're 20 minutes, about 20 minutes after sunset. And I'll put these two photos I just took, one a couple of minutes ago and this one. The color difference is just astounding. And you'll actually see that this one here is actually quite blue. The last one still had a lot of the orange and the pinks from the sun rays. And it's just amazing. Like, I'm used to it. So, but it still gives you a bit of a buzz because you're going like, wow, in just a couple of minutes, light has changed so much. I've been doing workshops for so many years, and it's something that I tell people that you get used to, but the more you're out here at this time of the night, at this time of the day, the more you understand how light changes. Quite a few years ago, I read an article written by Ken Duncan. He is, I guess, to me, rated as one of the best landscape photographers that Australia's ever produced. He is just a great guy, very down to earth. If you ever meet him, he's just such down to earth. There is no ego in this guy. And he wrote a blog about light, and he said, to be a good landscape photographer, you have to understand light. And the only way to understand light is to get out there. The more times you get out there, the more you understand light. Once you understand how light affects your photo, you're on your way. Not on your way to success, but you're on your way to capturing great images because you understand how light can affect your photo. This is why sometimes I tell people, if you're out here on a sunset, most of the time, give yourself time. Don't say, I've really got to rush back home. Yes, sometimes family life takes hold and you say like, okay, I've got to get back. But if you don't have a time restriction, say, okay, I'm just going to stay a little bit longer. Sometimes you'll actually get your best photo at twilight. Let's keep taking photos. Wow, so 3 seconds, it's hugely unexposed now. And I've actually got to go to 10 seconds. Now is when we're seeing, because I'm looking at these boats in front of me and I can see the glow from the lights now is starting to affect the boats. And right in the foreground here, I can actually start seeing that tinge. It's not going to be in our photo, but just in front of me here, the tide is still low, and the rocks and all that, the mud, is showing that orangey glow. It's very evident in the video. You can actually see just there. I can just see a little bit of this in the photo, and you can see in the video, it's orange, and it's displaying this in my photo. Now, I'm actually just going to make sure, yes, we're still not blowing the highlights. Now, really, we're just about done, because if there was a moon, so there's just a little bit of moon, but if there was a lot of moon around, I would actually stay around until it got dark, because if we were like 3/4 moon or a full moon, especially a full moon, the boats would be lit up by the moon. Yes, we'd have all this artificial light, but I can control this artificial light. The moon would actually give a nice glow to the jetty. Sometimes I like going out, not just to shoot astro, but to go out into the city, or to come out a place where I know I can actually get a very nice photo at night. Boats, and we just have a little bit of this artificial light on the boats, which would be much easier to handle than where we are now. But we're already into this lockdown because of everything that's happening. So I'm trying to keep separate from everybody. There is nobody within cooey of me, but there was a couple of people throwing a cast net across that jetty when I set up. And I'm just weighing up the idea of staying here and shooting a couple of twilight photos from a different location. I might, because there's nobody there now, I might actually just stop now, pack up, move to the end of this jetty and take a couple of different photos. We'll take one more photo from here and then I'll make that decision. I've been talking just for a couple of minutes and it's showing me that I'm getting underexposed very quickly, and I'm at 30 seconds, so we've gone from 10 to 30 very quickly. We're losing light now very quickly, and we keep doing this until we get pitch black. Once we're in this sort of what's called an astro time, your light won't change. So when we're taking photos of stars at night, once it gets pitch black, once we're in that nighttime mode, and tonight this will be at around probably about 6:45 or 7 o'clock, our light won't change. So you could actually be taking photos at night, and unless there's artificial lights around you, then your settings won't change at all. Now, all that's happening is I'm starting to build up a bit of light in the foreground, but that's because this light now is starting to light up the boats, and this orange hue is starting to creep across the water and starting to affect the boats. At f11, 30 seconds, I'm still correctly exposed. So what we'll do is we'll quickly stop, and I'll put the camera away, and we'll quickly walk over to the jetty, and I'll show you where the jetty is. It's just there. We'll reset up over there and we'll see what happens. So we've moved from our other spot to here. We're on the jetty now. And because we're on the jetty here, I actually want a different perspective. So we've actually zoomed in a bit, and I'm right on, I'm pretty sure I'm on about 18 mil. I'll just check that. But I'm pretty sure I'm around about 18 mil. There's a catamaran in front of us with the trawler. The sun is just to our left here, and it's actually not in the picture. Of course, the sun's set, but I don't want that really strong light. I'm actually wanting a more twilight feel to it. So we're going to make sure that we center the horizon, and the catamaran has actually just lit up its light. So we might find that light will actually just be slightly overexposed, but there's not much that we can do. I'm still shooting with the video as well on my phone. It's actually showing it's actually quite dark, but it's giving you an idea of how strong that light on the catamaran is. Now, one thing I must mention, a habit of mine years ago was, if I was moving a short distance like this, which is only about 50, 60 meters, I'd leave my camera on the tripod and carry everything. These days, I'm much more careful. If I'm moving to a spot more than 5, 10 meters, everything goes into my bag. You never know. You trip over, you fall down, that's it. If your camera hits the ground, you've most likely done your lens in and your camera as well. Only takes a couple of minutes to put everything away and put everything back. So if you're going to walk any short distance, put everything away and then grab it all back out of the camera. I see people, like when I'm out and about, especially in the city, they'll have their camera on their tripod and they'll be walking along All it takes is for somebody just to give it a knock on your shoulder or something like that. The camera can go flying and you've just lost all your gear. Now we've also taken the filters off. It's dark now, there's no need for filters. But what I have put on is my lens hood. Now, I tell people, whether it's day or night, unless I have slot filters in front, I put my lens hood on. Tonight, this is very important because we've got a very bright light in front of us here, and we've got lights in on both our sides. And the lens hood will actually stop some of this ambient light filtering onto the lens. And some people sometimes they'll send me a message saying, hey, look at this photo. What's happened here? You can see in the photo that ambient light has come in and you can see all these little spots across the screen, and that's ambient light hitting your screen. So I tell them, put on your lens hood. If your lens didn't come with a lens hood, look on eBay or on the internet and you'll easily find aftermarket lens hoods for any camera. So a lens hood definitely stops this sort of ambient light. Even when I'm doing astro, I'll put on the lens hood because one, it can actually stop the dust that could be flying around if we're in like out back and all that, and it just protects the front of the lens. Now let's get ourselves set up, hey? We're at f11. There's no need for f11 now. Our foreground here is so close. So we'll come down to f5.6. Before we do that, how about we focus? I'm using live view and it's telling me I'm in focus. I've got a green square and we're shooting at 30 seconds at ISO 100. Now, if I don't want to go more than 30 seconds, if it's underexposed here, I could easily lift the ISO a little bit or go longer. Now, if I want to do this very quickly, what I could have done is come down to f2.8 and have a very short shutter speed just to see if my composition is right. Sometimes at night when you're shooting and even with live view, if you can't really determine your scene, that's the best thing to do. Go as low down as you can, shoot very high ISO so that you're only using, let's say, 1 or 2 seconds exposure, and then you can quickly frame your shot. A video that I plan to do in the very near future is to do a nighttime shot where I'll show you how I actually set up for astrophotography, and I'll try to do that as soon as possible, but I also need a fairly clear night. Wow, how's that? I'll put this in the timeline here. This is just amazing. The colors on the foreground here, it's hard to believe, but actually play quite well. On the right we have an orangey glow from these lights, and on the left here, these LED lights behind us on my left here are actually casting a greenish tinge on the water. It gives you like a rainbow effect because in the sky we've actually got blue. So we've got towards the sun, we've got like a purplish hue, then it goes to blue, then it goes to orange down here, and then it goes to green. It actually looks really good. Now, even though my camera, I've leveled the camera, I always like to try to keep the tripod as level as possible. I see sometimes people like their tripods are leaning over. I try to get my tripod as level as possible. And at the moment, the little bubble on my spirit level on this tripod is in the center. And I try to do that so that everything stays level. I'm actually using a very heavy duty tripod here. It is a Manfrotto 055 XP Pro. It weighs about 3 kilos. It's quite heavy, but because I used to do a lot of astro and all that, I really wanted a very heavy duty tripod. My newer tripod my mobile phone sits on is a Vanguard tripod. It's actually very light. I actually quite like it as a traveling tripod because there's not much weight to it. And these days I'm trying to minimize the amount of weight that I carry, so if I don't need this very heavy duty tripod, most of the time I just grab my new Vanguard tripod. Now it's showing we're slightly underexposed. From 30 seconds, now I'll actually use the interval meter and we'll go long exposure set at 30, We'll take it to 45 seconds. Now, because it's going over 30 seconds, if I just press the intervalometer now, the camera will still shut off at 30. So I've actually got to set the camera to bulb. There we go. So now it's going to take 45 seconds. Now on my camera, I can go to about 50 seconds without using noise reduction. Once I'm past that 50 seconds, I really like using the inbuilt camera noise reduction. There's pros and cons with it. The con is that if I was using it now for 45 seconds, the camera would take another 45 seconds to take out the digital noise inside the camera, inside the photo. Digital noise is, it's not just grain. What this digital noise is you'd see all these little red and green and sometimes blue dots across the screen. Trying to edit that out of your photos is painful, especially if you've got 100 or so of them. It pays just to do the long exposure noise reduction. And this is what I do if I'm doing long exposures at night. It pays dividends. Wow, that looks so much better. Now that orange tinge is really starting to climb across. We're just about in pitch black now, and this orange tinge is very evident. I might just take one more photo and then I'll call it quits, because getting rid of all this orange tinge is actually going to be a bit of a work. The beauty of actually shooting a long exposure is there's a little bit of a breeze around and there's a bit of ripples on this water here. Doing a long exposure, if I look at this and I zoom in, we're just about dead smooth. Now I was actually still at ISO 125, so if I go down to ISO 100 and I can increase, let's say, my exposure to f8. Now we've gone from 5.6 to f8, so we're definitely going to be shooting it longer than 45 seconds. And here I will show you a very good trick. It's not so much a trick, but it's just science to make sure that your exposure is correct. We leave the camera at f8. Now, instead of ISO 100, we go to ISO 6400. Now, the reason we go to ISO 6400 is because 100, we should be ISO 6000, but there's no 6000. So let's say we're going from ISO 100 to ISO 6000. It divides equally. So 1 second at ISO 6400 equals 1 minute at ISO 100. So if we redial here to 1 second at f8, okay, it's underexposed because we've gone to f8. We're at 6400, 2 seconds, f9. So by doing this, we've actually reduced quite a bit of the glow, and the sky now is much bluer. We'll leave it at that. So now 2 seconds, f9, ISO 6400. So all I do now is on my timer, I come across here, 2 minutes, I'll take away the 45 seconds. Okay, set. Now, remember to change your ISO from 6400 to 100, and your 2 seconds, you want to go to bulb, and now we go into our settings, and we have long exposure noise reduction, and we click it to on. So now it's going to take a 2-minute exposure and then work for 2 minutes to get rid of the noise. Let's go. We'll come back in a couple of minutes. This will most likely be the last shot of the night. And these two, the one that I shot at 2 seconds at ISO 6400, I'll put it in here, plus also the one that is shot at 2 minutes. Now these will be unedited, because in part 2, I will actually show you how I edit a few of these shots and what they look like. I might just put 1 or 2 edited photos in this video just to show you what they look like in Lightroom once I've edited. But if you actually want to see how I edit, I don't know, I might choose 3 or 4 photos from tonight, how they look when I've actually done the editing process. So part 1, which is this video, when you see it on YouTube, part 2 will follow very soon afterwards. Now, if you like these videos, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, click on notifications, and you'll never miss when I put up a new video. These I do just to help people. Okay, did you hear it go click? Finish the 2 minutes, and now my camera's telling me job NR, so it's working on the noise reduction. So I'm 58 this year, and I joke with people saying that I actually saved up to buy a camera before I actually bought a car. Such was my love for photography, even when I was in my early 20s. That's it, the photo's finished. It looks great. Now, if I wasn't doing this video, I'd already made up my mind that this was the last photo that I was taking. So once the camera finished taking the photo itself and it was in noise reduction, I could actually start taking off the timer remote, getting everything put into my camera bag, making sure that I don't turn the camera off, because of course if I turn the camera off, the noise reduction stops. So if you're doing a 45-minute long exposure, at the end of that 45 minutes, you could actually just put your camera in the camera bag, making sure that you don't touch the on and off switch on your camera. You don't have to sit out here waiting all this time. Thanks for watching tonight's video. Hope you enjoyed it. So this is Charles for Charles N Photography. I'll see you next time.